And there are major adverse health risks of tobacco, including, of course, the increase of cancer. Many of the compounds that are in burned tobacco leaves are known as tars, and they are known carcinogens. I mean, they promote the development of cancer. But what's also fascinating, actually, is that nicotine itself can actually significantly increase your risk, for the development of lung cancer, because it turns out those nicotinic cholinergic receptors we've been discussing are also expressed in the lining of, the lungs. The activation of these nicotinic cholinergic receptors by nicotine is linked to the initiation of biochemical cascades within those cells that line the lungs, that will basically signal back to the genes to initiate programs, to switch on certain genes, to upregulate some, downregulate others, that will actually promote cellular survival. So while these tars and other compounds, that are toxic and carcinogenic and are doing damage, to the actual cells in the lungs, these cells are accumulating damage. But unlike, it turns out with, like, for example, marijuana smoke, which also does significant damage, to the cells that line the lungs, it'll stop the cells that have these little cilia that will, help to flush, gunk and other stuff that we breathe in, basically out, out of the lungs. Actually, it'll paralyze those and can do lots and lots of damage. But oftentimes those cells, they reach a certain level of damage, and then they commit what they call cellular suicide. They commit what's called apoptosis, and they will, set in motion this plan which will, kill themselves off, and then, they'll be replaced by new cells. But because nicotine is in a cigarette, for example, and it's, basically coming in with, with those tars that are doing the damage, and it's acting at the nicotinic cholinergic receptors and promoting cellular survival. When you're smoking cigarettes, the cells that would normally give it up persist. They continue. They keep going. And then, therefore, they accumulate more and more and more damage and are more likely to develop into cancer cells, where they have uncontrolled growth and division. In addition to cancer, right, nicotine is also, and tobacco is also associated with heart disease, emphysema. Research in 2015 actually identified a whole host of additional adverse health effects, including kidney disease, intestinal disease, high blood pressure, the persistence and the development of various infections. 42 million Americans smoke, and the mortality rate of smokers is about 2 to 3 times higher. On average, people lose about a decade of their life, and oftentimes they're far more ill, as they persist and live, as long as they actually do. But nicotine is actually, I think, quite interesting how it amplifies, just nicotine alone amplifies the risks of carcinogens found in tobacco smoke, and potentially amplifies the risk of carcinogens that are found in, urban environments, things that we breathe in cities, for example, that are also, doing damage to lung cells and, generating additional damage to, to the cells that line our lungs. The nicotine that you might get through, by vaping, the efforts to try to, like, reduce the harm by reducing the tars, not having the actual, carcinogenic components. We're still breathing in unhealthy air often, and just the nicotine alone may be promoting, or increasing the risk of the development,